Waiting for the best deals? Spring Black Friday savings are here. Shop early access now at Blinds.com and save big on new custom window treatments. Blinds.com makes upgrading your window treatments easy with free virtual consultations, free samples sent to your door, and professional measure and installation services. Plus, you always get Blinds.com's 100% satisfaction guarantee. Shop Blinds.com's Spring Black Friday early access now. Save up to 40% with minimum purchase, plus a free measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Today on CityCast Boise, we're sharing our first ever live show. Last week, Mayor Lauren McLean and Valley Regional Transit CEO and Amtrak board member Elaine Clegg joined me on stage at the Boise Depot to celebrate the landmark's 100-year anniversary. And to dive into the question, will passenger rail service ever return to the Treasure Valley? Or is train travel to Salt Lake just a nostalgic pipe dream? It's Monday, April 21st. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. All right, we're going to start with just a little bit of history for maybe somebody who doesn't know about the Boise Depot. And I learned a lot prepping for this and writing this. Boise's Depot, with its iconic Spanish-style design, has stood watch over our city for a century. But its story is as much about absence as arrival. While cities across the West were booming with rail traffic by the late 1800s, Boise didn't get its first passenger train until 1925, long after most of the region was connected by steam and steel. When the depot finally opened on April 16, 1925, Boiseans celebrated with a 90-minute parade and a party in Julia Davis Park that lasted all night long. It was the Roaring 20s, after all. When profits began to wane in the 1970s, Amtrak stepped in to create the Pioneer Line with service to Denver and Portland, but ridership continued to decline, and in 1997, the last train left the Boise Depot. Many people thought that was the end of the line, but today there is a new push to bring passenger rail back, and plenty of politics, nostalgia, and logistics at play. So let's dig in and find out, could passenger trains really come back to Boise? All right, Elaine, my first question is for you. You rode the Portland Rose that was operated by Union Pacific back in the day. Can you paint a picture for us about what that experience was like?
I sure can. So my sisters and I, we lived in Denver, Colorado, and my grandparents lived in Boise. And we would ride the train to Boise so that we could spend time with them. Otherwise, we'd only maybe get to spend a week or so. So the three of us would get on the train in Denver. We'd get a sleeper car. There was a dome car, so you could go and watch all the scenery during the day. There was a wonderful dining car. You had great food. And we had this cute little bunk room where we all, slept piled on top of each other for the 2-day ride. But it was magical because on our own, we could come to see our grandparents. And then our parents could come later in the summer and spend time for a week or two, and then we'd go back to Denver. And it was one of the first times I realized that this kind of travel gives you independence. When you're not able to drive, not able to do the things that are typically needed today to travel somewhere, when you have trains, you have transit, you can still be independent. You can still do those things on your own that other people can't, that you wouldn't be able to do on your own and other people can't do for you. So just a wonderful, incredible experience.
And how would you say that experience shaped your passion for bringing passenger rail back to Boise?
Oh, it certainly did. Knowing how magical it is to ride a train, knowing how convenient it is, knowing the independence that it creates for people in our community gives me a deeper passion to bring it back than I might otherwise. There's lots and lots of reasons for train travel, but at its heart, I think it's because people have so much fun when they travel by train. My husband and I recently took a train in upstate New York. My husband, if you haven't met him, is 6'9". When we got on the plane to go to New York, at the start of the trip, he said, I think this is the last time I'm ever going to get on an airplane. I just can't stand it. It's so uncomfortable. We got on the train and He was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This is the way to travel. And I think people just crave that. So, yes.
And Mary McLean, when was the last time that you rode on a passenger train, and what do you remember most about the trip?
First off, I have lots of train stories from when I was a kid. I remember one winter going from my grandmommy and granddaddy's house to my Nana and Pap's house from Fort Wayne to Pittsburgh. And we were in a car with windows, and it was winter, and the moon was bright. And I just have these images of like trains and snow. And in college, I used the train a ton. I'd jump on in South Bend, get off in Syracuse. There was a time my roommate and I, Claire, thought we were driving to Boston to go to the Notre Dame Boston College football game, and her parents ixnayed that at the last minute. And we're like, oh no. And so we got on the train because it was left in the middle of the night. And my husband jumped on in Rochester in the morning. We went down to Boston, stayed with my husband's brother, and had a great time. I wanted to do that with my kids. And so the last time I was on a train, I wanted to do it for two reasons. One, we needed to go see grandparents. But two, I really wanted them to understand how big this country was and how different all the parts and pieces of it were. And I didn't have the time to drive them across the country and then drive my car back. So we jumped on the train. But to do that, we had to go to Salt Lake. And so we drove to Salt Lake. The train was supposed to pick us up at 5:30 in the morning, so we got a hotel room. And one of my most vivid memories of it, unfortunately, is not a great one because we went to the platform to get on, Aiden, Madeline, and I, and Scott was saying goodbye, and all of a sudden Aiden realized his dad wasn't coming too. And he just started screaming and crying, and it looked like I was stealing a child because he was so devastated that Scott wasn't joining us. And so I thought, oh my God, this is going to be such a long trip because we were going all the way to New York. And he recovered. And the memories that I have are of, we were squished. We tried to save money. So he shared a bed with me, and Madeline had the other ones. We got a 2-person car. But sitting in the dining room and meeting people that were all about all these different trains and having them tell my kids stories. Their first exit, once we left the West, which was amazing to go from Salt Lake to Denver and see how beautiful this country is, which is part of what I wanted. But the first platform we got on once we left the West, both my kids audibly yelled at the humidity because they had never experienced humidity before. And it was a summer where the Mississippi was flooding. It was awful. But it was just so funny to see, because they got to get off at every stop for a couple minutes, where they were stopped for longer, so they could just see, kind of scan and see different places. We stopped and saw my college roommate in Chicago in the layover. She picked us up and we spent some time down in Chicago, and then we got on the night train and got off in Syracuse like I did in college, and all 4 grandparents were there waiting for us. And it was really special. My kids don't remember the slow time in Chicago. It was really hot and they wanted to get off the train. Aiden doesn't remember feeling like we were leaving Scott forever. And they still talk to this day about how they had the most amazing trip taking the train across the country.
Well, and that's a little different than flying, where it's a little hard to point out the window, be there's the Mississippi River. It's, not quite the same experience.
Yeah, I mean, the train took us over, and it was that year, one of these years where it was just flooding. And so you saw the vastness of the Mississippi River and the floods and the impact in the Midwest. And they got to kind of hear the sounds and the way people talk differently and experience just the interactions with folks of all walks of life from all around the country getting on and off the train, which you do a little bit of that in the airport, but not nearly the same way. And then they just got to see the country in a way that you don't otherwise get to.
Okay, I want to pivot from the past a little bit because there's so much to talk about now. And I appreciate both of you sharing your stories. Mary McLean, you've been working to build regional support for passenger train with universities, chambers of commerce, other mayors throughout the region. What's the strategy behind that outreach? And has anyone surprised you either with their support or their hesitation?
Oh, that's a great question. And first off, Elaine has been working on this on the long lines forever. So I want to give a nod to her work. And this work kind of restarted for the shorter route when grant funds became available to study the return of routes that used to exist that are these shorter routes. And talk with the mayor of Salt Lake, Erin Mendenhall, about the interest, and she shared it. Her community shared the interest as well. And so we committed to start working towards each other. If you think about like where the route goes. Aaron Mendenhall worked to build support from Salt Lake to the border, and with Air Force bases and chambers and the universities and cities along the way. And then I did the same with my team from here, and with great support from Treasure Valley mayors, but all the mayors along the route, including some in eastern Idaho that wouldn't be on the route, and then universities, business chambers, others, to build the support that would ultimately be part of our grant application that we plan to submit this year. I was about to say this fall, but this year. And if we are selected, then we'll have funds to really get down to the basics of the route, explore it, and see if it's something that's viable for the future.
So with these conversations, does it seem like other metro areas are taking this seriously, or, they're just having fun chatting?
Oh, people are taking this really seriously. There's quite a lot of investment happening right now in rail to modernize the rail system across the country, but then finally a recognition that there's a whole bunch of people in the West that don't have access to rail service anymore, and something needs to be done about it. And then I'd say that the opposition that we've received hasn't been a surprise either. People be like, it's expensive. Well, yes, investing in moving people and in infrastructure in our country is expensive, and it's investments that help support economic development and community vitality. They're worthy investments. So I can't say that I've heard anything in opposition that has been a surprise. The biggest surprise has been the groundswell of really strong support all along the route.
Well, and I was just telling my mom about doing a live show, and she was wishing me well, and she wanted to know what the topic was. And we don't talk politics. She's not interested in politics. And I mentioned it was about passenger rail, and she instantly lit up talking about stories about when she was a child. She's so excited, really let her know. You keep her updated on what's going on, because she'd like to see this come back. And I've never seen her light up about any city issue ever. So I do think that this seems to cross lines that other topics don't seem to cross. Elaine, I want to jump to you now. You are the first person from the Mountain West to sit on Amtrak's board in decades. What have we lost by not having a voice in these discussions up to this point? And how are you using your seat to advocate for Boise's rail comeback?
Well, that's a really good question. So I've only been on the board since January 6th was when I was sworn in. I've been to 3 meetings so far. Frankly, I think it's a great board. The surprising thing that I learned, it's the first time in almost 20 years that Amtrak has had a full board of directors. Congress has not been confirming people, and so it's been short. And in that shortness, what has been lost is representation from our region, representation from other points of view. And so I think already there's a recognition in the meetings I've been to that I bring something different that has been missing for a while. In the recent conversations, as this administration has developed its own footprint, the advocacy world for rail, which I became a part of about 3 years ago, got very agitated and concerned, as many of us are, what's the future going to be? And as I've been meeting with them and then taking that conversation back to the Amtrak board, the interesting thing that I've seen at those board meetings is that it's a point of view that just hasn't ever gotten to the board level before, because there's been nobody there who was plugged into the advocacy and plugged into the West who could take them. And so I think in the end, if we're allowed the time to get the work done that we need to, there's a real appetite on the board that I'm hearing and seeing to expand services on what's called the long distance network. The mayor was talking about a route from the Treasure Valley to the Salt Lake Valley, and those kinds of routes are typically state-supported to some degree, even when Amtrak runs them, which many of them are run by Amtrak. And then the long-distance routes are ones that are more than 750 miles, in our case, from Seattle or Portland to beyond Salt Lake, one way or the other. The beauty of having both, I've learned, here's the other thing I've learned, is that they each support each other. If there's only a long distance route on all that length of track, there's not a lot of reason for the freight to move out of the way and prioritize passenger and change the way that they operate in a way that can make passenger more effective. But if there's 3 trains a day or more on that same route, or at least on parts of it, then it's a different ballgame. There's more money at play, there's more fares, there's more investment in the track, and there's more reason for everyone to get together and make that system work more effectively and efficiently. So what the mayor's been doing has been extremely important, because in other parts of the West where they're also asking for long distance routes, there's not some of this same energy to also overlay it with these other routes that can make it more successful. So I'm hopeful that by having my point of view there, by being able to plug into the advocacy community in a way that no one on the board has been able to for a while, and bringing my knowledge and experience of local government and local transit to that board, I'm very hopeful that given some time, we will figure out a way to reestablish more long-distance routes, including ours.
Well, and Elaine, it seemed like the Biden administration was considering revitalizing rail around the country, but it doesn't seem like the current administration shares those values. In fact, the CEO of Amtrak recently resigned because of his strong opposition to passenger rail privatization that has been discussed by Elon Musk and DOGE. What kind of an impact could that have on Boise's push to bring back rail?
You know, I obviously will have an impact, but here's what I hang my hat on. When our rail went away originally in 1971. So in the late 60s, early 70s, the freight carriers in this country, who until that time had been required to provide passenger rail, backed out of that requirement in return for a requirement that they allow passenger rail run by someone else to run on their tracks. At that point, Amtrak was established, and much of the long-distance system in the United States was lost for a year or two. In our case, it was lost for almost 6 years. But there was such a groundswell of support from all over the country, from every walk of life, from every point of view, saying, no, this is important to us. We need it. We can't lose it. That Amtrak was both formed and then charged with creating a long-distance system. That sentiment is still there, I believe. I hear it. The mayor was talking about how she hears from the folks along this line how important it was, and the stories that just spontaneously come. And since I've been appointed to this, I can't tell you how many people have stopped me on the street, have called me, have emailed, and given me their stories about rail. And like I said, it's from every walk of life, every point of view, every part of the country, frankly. And so my natural optimism, but also my knowledge of how rail has been supported historically in the United States is that no one administration, no one point of view is going to just destroy it, because there's too many people who care too much about it. And I think we've already seen that. The CEO of Amtrak did resign, and we did have a board meeting after that. And we've seen the administration coming in, learning what we're doing, learning the good work that's been going on at Amtrak in the last 5 years, and so far finding ways to support that work and not ways to walk away. So I'm hopeful. It doesn't mean there won't be changes. It doesn't mean that this might be less funding for the next 3 or 4 years than there were the previous 3 or 4 years. But you need to remember that in the last 4 years, we had 10 times more funding than we've ever had in the rail system. So if we lose a little bit of it, we'll still have more, I think. And what we really have, I think, is a reawakened imagination and support for passenger rail all over the country. And I think that's what's going to carry us forward.
And Mary McLean, I want to take some of that information and kind of distill it into Boise. A couple of years ago, the Idaho Transportation Department misfiled some paperwork for a grant that would have provided initial funding for a study to bring back Boise's Pioneer Line. With the recent presidential administration change, do you have any concerns about our ability to get access to that grant when we refile?
Sure, I appreciate the question. And it was a really frustrating experience to go through, to know that so much work had been done, a mistake was made, and because of that mistake, we weren't considered for the grant, which I was very confident we would receive, but mistakes are made. And that happens. And so we kept at it. Bree and I convened all of the mayors along the line, had a conversation about how we wanted to keep at it. Everybody agreed. And the grant that I referred to that we'll be putting in for is the same grant 2 years later, which is a bummer. But that said, we're putting in for the same grant. It might be a little tougher to get at this time. We've done more work. We're 2 years further along than we were before, and I'd say more competitive, and look forward to submitting that, having the conversations that we need to have. And then I'm hopeful that the administration will see the work that's been done, honor the value and work that was put into it before, recognize the importance of the investment, and connect us with Salt Lake, as both states really want to see.
And Elaine, there was a recent U.S. Department of Transportation Amtrak study that actually ranked our line 13th out of 14, right near the bottom, saying it wasn't really a high priority at this time. Why do you think we were ranked so low when it seems like there is so much support for this?
There was a decision made early on to limit the distance that they thought people would travel to a train station to 30 miles. And those of us in the West said, wow, you guys are so wrong. In the West, we'll go 100 miles to get to a train station, at least. And they... right? They would not change that distance. And so if you look at the early criteria and how it was ranked, we actually ranked quite high. But then when they based it on how many people, what percentage of the population would be able to get to a train station, we fell clear off the map. So I've asked, and Amtrak has already agreed, to analyze those results and look at it in a little bit different way. What's feasible, what has political support, what has financial support, what are the economic development impacts that are possible. So we'll see.
And if you think that they could shift that data point, because I'm guessing none of them, traveled 100 miles to go to a hot springs. That's nothing. We'll do that.
That's a good point.
100 miles of train, 100 miles of hot springs, so it's whatever. If we could change that one data point, what kind of an impact do you think that would have on our ranking?
It would have a big impact because all the other data points had us ranked very high. Access to education, access to natural features, Shoshone Falls, the national parks in close to eastern Idaho. All of those economic factors. Our rural areas are economically depressed. We are close to a lot of tribal communities. All of those factors ranked very high.
What sort of promises have you made to yourself this year? Getting in better shape, eating healthier, saving more money, traveling somewhere new? What about discovering a new culture by learning a new language? With Babbel, you can do that in just a few weeks. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in new languages, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations. The Spanish I learned on Babbel really helped me on a recent trip to Mexico City, ordering in restaurants, shopping at the textile market, cheering on at the Lucha Libre, and I've been keeping it up since I got home. You're a podcast listener. I know that because you're listening here. I bet you'll love Babbel's new podcasts. On Eavesdrop in Espanol, which I listen to, you get to listen to a real conversation, then have the teacher host explain back to you. Then you listen again and catch everything. And you can even read along in the transcript. It's a really fun and effective way to learn. Let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
What does your mom want for Mother's Day? To feel close to you, so don't forget to give her a call. And a gift that can help you stay connected all year, an Aura digital photo frame. My mom lives in another state and I don't get to see her as much as I want to. I love sharing the meaningful moments in our lives though, like my oldest driving with their permit for the first time, or the kids' elaborate blanket forts. I can snap a photo or video and send it straight to her Aura frame. Aura was named Best Digital Photo Frame by Wirecutter, and after using one, I get why. It makes sharing moments with loved ones feel easy and intentional. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off, plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver matte frame. That's auraframes.com. Promo code CityCast. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, Mayor McLean, what would Boise need to build or fix in order to be ready for trains again? Like, are the tracks usable? Do we have rail cars? Do we need to fix them? Do we need to manufacture them? Like, what does this look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really is all of the above, but that is what the first round grant would allow us to explore and then be able to itemize the costs and needs that we have. And think about it. I mean, it makes sense. Trains left here in the 70s. Yes, I would imagine there's work to be done on the track outside because it hasn't been used for people trains in a long, long time. And yes, there are things that would need to be done in this depot to make it possible to use for transit. And there are things that'll need to be done along the route to make sure that trains can cross safely, folks can get over those tracks. That first round grant that we're applying for would provide $500,000 for us to fully study the route and be able to itemize so much more of that and then know how and when and if we're able to go into the next stage of planning based on what we learn in that first stage.
Are there any public-private partnership models that the city has looked at or considered that would maybe help fund service or operations?
We haven't looked at specific models to explore how you would fund the operations. But this is what from a public-private perspective. But as Elaine mentioned earlier, the shorter routes, there's an expectation that it is funded by so there's state support. So the grant program as it was set up created a 10-year runway, if you will, of funding. If you get the first grant, then you get to start doing the work to prepare. And if the work to prepare demonstrates that, yes, this is truly viable as we believe it is, then you move into the next phase. And at each point in time, there's grant money that comes up with that, and it starts to ramp down towards the end, which would allow the route to start with more federal funds and then over time to be funded more from a state, local, or business perspective. And then there's fun things. I just thought of this. One of the things that the Amtrak CEO said to me at some point was there's like fun ways that these routes make revenue. So people have thrown out if there's a Utah or a Utah State game, like you market the train trip tied to the football game, and there's, you have more revenue because the revenue that comes in on the train goes towards the route. So you do you do like football tour parties, which sounds kind of fun because you're just on a train with a whole bunch of fans. And so they were just throwing out all these ways that other cities that have these state-supported routes from one city to another, these shorter routes, have increased the revenue that comes in to make it more sustainable financially.
Well, and with the Olympics coming to Salt Lake City in 2034, is there maybe a potential window to make the case for passenger rail as part of the infrastructure push to get people from Boise down to Salt Lake?
Yeah, and thanks for that flag. And that's not why I was talking about the Utah State Games. I forgot about the Olympics for a minute, but very much so. In the fall and then again in the winter, I was speaking with folks involved with planning for the Olympics and all of the infrastructure investments that will need to be made in the Salt Lake corridor, but truly that expands much further to support the 2034 Winter Olympics. This is high on Salt Lake's priority list and Utah's list. The longer route that they are seeking from Salt Lake to Vegas is also high on their list. I would say that the tie to the Olympics is yet another reason that makes our application strong, because the Salt Lake area to support the 2034 Olympics will be looking to areas much further afield, like Boise, to support it in many ways. And this train route stopping along the way and moving people north and south in the Wasatch Corridor north of Salt Lake is important to them. And I kind of like the idea. So in the Olympics, when they were there last time, Madeline was like 3, and we decided we wanted to go see the Olympics. So we got in our car at like 3 a.m. and drove down. We couldn't afford to stay, so we just drove down and hoped we'd find tickets. We saw the bobsled, which was kind of scary for a little kid because it'd go by, make a ton of noise, and then be gone. But so we watched the bobsled. We saw the men win the gold. We watched some fireworks. We got back in our car and drove to Boise. It was a long, almost 24 hours. That'd be so cool to put on USA gear, jump on the train, go down the Olympics. Like, so cool.
Well, and sometimes that drive is a little sketchy in the winter, to put it mildly.
It was sketchy. We were young, so we weren't as tired as we would be now if we tried that. Madeline slept, so it was all good.
Well, and another factor I want to address is travel time, because I am a air travel hater. I will complain all day about having to go early and how long it takes, and it takes the whole day. But once you're in the air, it's quite fast. It's a fast way to travel. So, Elaine, how long would a train ride, let's say from Boise to Salt Lake, be? What could people expect?
Well, I don't know that I can remember exactly from Boise to Salt Lake, but the study showed that from Portland to Denver was going to be 40 hours. And the reason for that is because they're counting on an average travel speed of 48 miles an hour. So back to the mayor's point about what kind of shape is the track in, most of the track in this section is class 2 or class 3. Class 2, if you're a passenger rail, you can run 60 miles an hour on. Class 3, you can run almost 80. If we got it to class 4, we'd be pushing those speeds even farther. And at class 5, you can go over 100 miles an hour. So part of it will be how much investment we make on those rails. There's lots of the track in Idaho where there's nothing for miles and miles and miles, and there's no reason you can't go faster as long as the track supports it. So long distance can be challenging on trains if you don't have the time or you don't want to take the time. But the other thing about trains, and you mentioned it, so it takes a while to get to the airport, and then you have to get, through security, and then you have to wait to board, and then you have to wait on the tarmac, and finally you get in the air. Then you have a travel time that's not very long, but then you get to your destination. You're probably on the edge of the city. You have to find an Uber or a train or something to get you into the city. So you take all of that time off the ends, and at least for shorter trips from here to Salt Lake, it actually makes a fair amount of sense to get on a train. It wouldn't be that much longer. The other thing the train does that a plane doesn't is allows you to go from Twin Falls to Logan, or Pocatello to Mountain Home, or Boise to Shoshone, or any number of city pairs in between that just aren't available by air, especially in this part of the country where there are very few airports except for, here and there. Boise being very much the largest commercial airport in Idaho. There's a tiny bit of commercial service in Twin Falls and Pocatello, a little bit more in Idaho Falls, a little bit in Coeur d'Alene, and that's it. And if you don't live in one of those places, you can't fly anyway. So train does all this other stuff.
And I'd say, too, that's one of the arguments against rail travel and the investment in rail between Boise and Salt Lake. I'd hear, you can just fly. Why would you jump on the train? Well, not every family of 6 can afford to buy a plane ticket to get to Boise or to get to Salt Lake. When I think about it, when I was in college, I had school loans. My parents took out school loans. I couldn't afford to buy an airplane ticket to get home to Syracuse. My options were the bus or the train. And that's how because I also couldn't afford to have a car, never had a car. And I used the train to go see family. And that's what I know people throughout this route, students throughout this route would have the opportunity to do if they could jump on to get down to Logan, get down to Salt Lake, even to get to Pocatello or get closer to Idaho Falls. So it opens the door of possibility for more folks that can't afford to just put a whole family on a plane to go down the Olympics or go down to Salt Lake to see family.
Well, and Elaine, would I be able to keep my shoes on and also travel with my full-size cosmetics?
Depends on the train.
And as big a water bottle as you want. In fact, you could go get one of those Nalgene's and carry that on.
The biggest water bottle I can possibly carry. Like, I'm just taking it.
Stanley, just to celebrate.
Amtrak does have trains with bike cars, so you can take your bike with you. There is an auto train that goes from Chicago to Florida, so you don't want to drive to Florida, but you want to get there, you can still take your car.
Well, and I want to ask the audience, and really, you won't hurt my feelings, truly, honestly. Realistically, let's say you would go to Salt Lake. How many of you would want to frequently take a passenger train to Salt Lake, knowing it might take 6 or 7 hours? You could drive in 5, you could fly in 1.5, but you do have to go earlier. How many of you would frequently choose to take a train? I would say, 60, 70%. Okay, how many would
these are train fans. They're here.
I know that's true. I think we have self-selected the people who are really excited to be in a train. How many would maybe drive sometimes, use a train sometimes, fly sometimes, depending on the occasion? How many people think? Like 90%. Yeah. So it seemed, just adding it as an option seems to be popular to our self-selected train enthusiast crowd.
Well, and to the mayor's point on cost, my husband and I could have flown from Albany to Buffalo to go to the football game. Would have cost us $800. It cost us $106. No, it cost us $96 to go by train.
No, and that's, I would say, and especially in, people throwing around recession, that's something families are thinking about. So this is kind of a question to both of you, because I would like to hear both of your answers, but how do we balance this desire for passenger train, I think this nostalgia for passenger train, with the hard realities like cost, demand, infrastructure? What are the arguments for passenger rail that could really move the dial and make this closer to reality?
I think the costs are real, and we don't want to shy away from that. And when we know more about the costs after we've been able to advance through this return to rail program, then we'd know what those trade-offs would be. And we'd be able to better make a decision, an informed decision, on whether or not the economic development impact that comes with rail, which is quite high, the movement of people to and from, and the opportunity that creates for individuals is quite high, and whether or not all those things are worth the investment that would be made between here and Salt Lake to return rail to our communities. Those are investments that, when you look around the country and there's been a resurgence of investment in rail, folks have decided that yes, it's worth the cost, because it's an investment in our communities, in connecting our economies, in future workforce as they have more access to opportunity and education, and then that chance to come home and travel from there as well. So, it'll really depend on what we learn, but when I look around the country and see the decisions that have been made, it tells me that yes, there's a value proposition. Yes, some people would say it's not worth it if it's not just like hard cash that comes from the system itself. But in most states and most communities, people are clamoring to be chosen for this program and deciding to make the investments because it pays off.
And I would say that we're at an interesting point in this country where we are seemingly willing to spend all kinds of money on road travel, on roadways and improvements, and on air travel. And then we get to trains and transit and we say, well, wait a minute, that's a subsidy. Why should we do that? But the fact of the matter is we subsidize all kinds of transportation. Every country in the world does. Even in Europe, where rail makes a profit, those private rail companies run on nationalized track with nationalized stations. And so it's relatively easy for them to make a profit because the expenditure has been made behind them by the country itself. We do that same thing for roadways and for airlines. and yet we somehow don't look at rail the same way. So I'm hopeful. One of the other things I think I bring to the Amtrak board that hasn't been there for a while is a real policy lens. And I've already identified 3 or 4 policies that we can begin talking to Congress about, which would level the playing field. And I think it's fine to talk about how much does it cost to run Amtrak, how much does it cost to improve the tracks, but let's talk about it across the playing field with the same metrics for other modes as well. There's also an interesting conversation beginning in this country about abundance, and it's happening in housing and energy and other places, and transportation is one of them. So what does abundance look like in transportation? I would argue that today we have an abundance of opportunity to drive. We have an abundance of opportunity to move things by truck. But we don't have abundance of almost any other mode. And so maybe as we talk about this idea that a successful country, a place that offers opportunity for all, should have abundance of all kinds of travel. And if we do that and we think about it that way, I think instead of talking about costs, we'll talk about the impact of certain investments in certain places and what economic return we could get for those.
What is your pitch, both of you, to skeptics or people who might say this is just a pipe dream? What is your pitch to say, no, this really could happen? This is something that could be a reality. We're working towards it. Don't lose faith in this. This is something that could be a reality for Boise.
Sure. Well, first off, I do the anti-pitch, which is, look, yes, it's a dream, but if we didn't dream and then try, the answer is no. So we're going to keep at it, and we should be hopeful because this mode of transportation worked for our city and for cities around this country and for this region forever. And it's been a little blip of time we haven't had this transportation. We have an incredible opportunity now to bring it back. There's huge support along the line for our kids to be able to move, for our businesses to connect with others. And we're doing everything we can to make this a reality. We'll keep doing it until somebody else tells us no, rather than saying no by not trying.
So a couple of things give me hope. The confirmation process for my appointment to the Amtrak board was a pretty interesting one and came down to the very last day of the last Congress, when they had before them a budget that if they didn't pass it by midnight meant that the government was going to go into shutdown. They didn't have Amtrak on the agenda that night, and the senators put it on the agenda. First, Senator Schumer filed cloture, but that wouldn't have done it by itself. What ended up happening was senators on both sides of the aisle, including our two, stepped in and began talking about how different it could be if Amtrak had a fully functional board and how important it was to make these appointments at this time. And lo and behold, after I'd told everyone there's no way they're holding up the budget for Amtrak, they did. And we got appointed, and this board now is full and working toward making things better. So that's the first piece of hope I have. The second, that it was bipartisan support. It wasn't just from one person. It wasn't just from one point of view. It was from all over. The second is that, as I said earlier, since I got this appointment, not a day goes by that someone doesn't stop me and tell me how important they think it is that we reestablish rail in this country. And those people are the ones who are going to make it happen. I'm not going to make it happen. It's all of the people in the country who support this and can support good decisions to make it happen who will be the ones. The last thing I'll say is before he resigned, I had a conversation with the CEO of Amtrak. And I asked him, I said, is it unrealistic for me to think that we could actually get a train in Boise in the next decade? I said, I want the facts. I don't want you to sugarcoat it, just tell me. He said, the infrastructure part of it is actually pretty easy. 3 years, maybe. What's going to hold it up is finding the operating funding. That's going to be a political decision, partly. And the other thing that's going to hold it up is potentially not having enough trains. because the United States right now doesn't have a strength in train manufacturing, among other things. I'm going to go down to Salt Lake in about a month and visit a train factory in Salt Lake and look at some trains that are being tested in California on a route much like the one from Boise to Salt Lake, because there's a real possibility that that's a place where we could get both some economic development, some 3P partnership, and get the other piece of the puzzle that we'll need, which is the train sets. And that will leave us just with that political question. Can we convince ourselves and our leadership that this is something that's worth investing in?
I think that's time. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank Elaine Clegg, Mayor McLean for taking time out of their schedule to really break this topic down and explain how we could dream and hope and work towards getting passenger rail in Boise.
Well, thanks so much. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for having this.
I hope you enjoyed this special episode of CityCast Boise. Thanks to Bonnie Shelton and Chloe Salabanks with Boise Parks and Recreation for making it possible. We'll be back tomorrow morning with the shocking story of a Boise man who allegedly led an international terrorist network. You won't want to miss it.